Recording. Right, welcome everybody to this session where we'll be talking about the Text Encoding Initiative and a few projects that we've been working on at Melbourne. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we at Melbourne Uni work and are on the lands of the Woiwurrung people and pay our respects to Woiwurrung elders past and present. We'll be recording this session, so if you don't want to be seen, or you can close off your video or whatever, but just be aware that we are recording. What we're going to talk about today is an introduction to text encoding, that is getting text from manuscripts, using images of manuscripts, putting the text and the images together. The technology we've been using for this is the Text Encoding Initiative, and we'll be showing examples of a few of these projects and talking about some of the tools that we're using. The program for the next hour and a half is as follows, and there'll be time for questions and discussion at the end, so you are free to I think you can put your questions into the chat, but if not, save them up and we'll talk about them at the end. So, text and page image together. What we're trying to do in these various projects is to show the original image of a manuscript together with a transcript, which allows you and others to verify your transcription. So if you've made a transcription of a manuscript, to look at the textual version and the image together, which can help you then to improve your manuscript, especially if it's in difficult handwriting, for example. But when you put the image of the manuscript up, sometimes it may reveal things to you that you didn't notice in your initial transcription. So it allows a sort of iterative approach to the original manuscript data, and it's also a good way of making this material available for future research, where people can always refer back to the primary research object, which is the manuscript. We're using the Text Encoding Initiative, so this is a long-standing set of standards for using markup within text, and it's XML markup. XML is also long-standing and widely used technology. And we mark up the structure of a document, so we're not worried so much about the appearance initially. We're worried about structuring the elements within a document, and then we can have a strong document that's got a way of being validated and can be interchanged with people in different places, because it's all using the same basic encoding conventions, which are given by the Text Encoding Initiative, and you can see the URL there. I'll put a list of URLs into the chat a bit later. This is what a minimal TEI XML document looks like. It's a bit forbidding, but basically you've got the title of the resource here. You've got some other information about the distribution, the source of the document, and then here you've got the text. So this is all you need to create a simple TEI XML document. There are tools around that will help you with how to do this, and we'll be talking about some of them later on. The TEI, as I said, it's a long-standing initiative. It's got a number of editions of the set of standards, but with a big community, mainly in Europe and North America, not so much in Australia, but it lets you mark up text for reuse, that is using these XML codes that we've just looked at, and then you can separate the structure of the document from the way that you present it, and you present it based on its structure, and you can have style sheets, you can publish it as HTML for web pages, PDF, and so on. So there are a number of tools. There's a community of TEI users that we can take advantage of. And that's why I've been using it, and some of my colleagues who you'll be hearing from today are using it. So here's an example of one of the outputs using a tool called TEI Publisher. I'm interested in this microfilm. I've been transcribing this microfilm over time. And this is a very nice way of presenting both the microfilm and the textual version of it. And this sometimes helps me see mistakes in my transcription, and I can go back and fix the transcription. And TEI Publisher lets me export this in various ways. So I can export as text, PDF, EPUB, and other formats. I got my document into this by using a tool called From the Page, which lets me do the transcription. And here you can see the transcription in From the Page. But the interesting thing is that From the Page also uses the TEI underneath the transcript that you're looking at here. So here's the TEI version, which is underneath this version that we're looking at the bottom. And it's then exported, and then it's a good TEI document, and it's still linked back to the manuscript. So this is the name of the manuscript here. And you can see this is the chunk of text associated with that manuscript. A project that I've been working on for some time that uses this technology is from the Daisy Bates papers at the National Library of Australia. Daisy Bates collected a lot of information about Australian Aboriginal people, mainly in Western Australia. But one of her projects was a questionnaire which she sent out and had people fill in. And then she took the results of that and typed them. And that's all in the National Library and 2 state libraries. And this chunk of materials, around 24,000 page images on paper. So this is a difficult set of material to navigate on paper, but it's much easier if it's, it could have been transcribed, which is what we did in this project. So transcribed it, put it into the TEI, and then allowed a geographic visualization of all of these vocabularies. And you can, of course, once you've got it as text, search it, and it's a research database. So this is what one of the manuscript pages looks like in the Bates papers. This is perhaps one of the most difficult pages. There are a lot neater pages than this, but this is the kind of thing that we're talking about. And this is the way that it's presented then on the website, which is live. It's been up for a couple of years now. And you can see you have a page image here, and here you have the textual version of that. And underneath that is the TEI XML. So in the page image, you have information, and you can infer that you have tribal names, speaker names, and other information, so geographic information. And here we've got codes for languages. We can include language information, other kinds of things inside these tags, which don't appear in the document, but they're underneath it as a computationally tractable piece of information. And again, that's what that looks like on the page. And there's the link if you want to go and look at this page live. This means that if you find a word, so if we're interested in the word for iguana, it will show you the page, the TypeScript page, and it will show you the questionnaire page that comes from. So you're always going back to the primary documents. It's making a much more robust research structure, research process. So here's an example of the site. As you scroll through the text, it's linked to the pages, and the pages scroll along with it. And you can look in more detail at parts of the page. You can search for things. So you can search, as you'd expect, search for text, and it will find all examples of that word in the manuscripts. It will also let you look at the geographic spread of these words. So given that this is a set of vocabulary items, we can extract the vocab items, and since we have geography associated with each of the word lists, we can show the geography as well. And here we're looking at the word for eye, and it shows us the word for eye in all of those manuscripts. And these are live links. So then if we go and click on one of these words, it will take us to the manuscript that that word comes from. And again, you can see the questionnaire and the TypeScript always on screen as you scroll through the text. So this was done by digitizing microfilms. The National Library did that. And we have agreements with the various libraries that have rights in the material. At the time, I wasn't able to use optical character recognition or OCR, so we had all of these typescripts typed. This was then converted to TEIXML using an online service called Ox Garage, but you could also do this computationally yourself. And it was then put through a pipeline that then creates this HTML page that you're looking at. We had to get our own domain name and website because there's no university site suitable for this kind of research project. And the various tools like text processors and XML processors were used to encode the material. But I think crucially for a lot of these projects, we have to employ a specialist who knows how to do the more complicated text encoding initiative work. And maybe this is something we can discuss later, but it is, I think, a part of all of these projects that in the end we need a specialist to do some of the work. So the benefits of encoding text in this way, as I've already alluded to, we can extract the text in various formats. We can output it as lists, PDF, RTF, or whatever. And we can continually correct our typed version because we're always looking at the page image as well. One of the great benefits of this particular project is that many Aboriginal people want access to this set of material, but it's all on paper in National Library. So by digitizing it and putting it online, it makes it much more accessible. And we've had thousands of hits on this website in the last couple of years. So for doing this kind of project at Melbourne Uni, we have the University Digitisation Service, which is a great service for scanning and OCRing text. And MDAP, who you'll hear more about in a moment, and SCIP, who I represent, the Social and Cultural Informatics Platform, have some TEI expertise. So now I'd like to ask Ed Tescari from MDAP to talk to us a little bit more about MDAP's role.
Yep. Thank you, Nick. Let me share my screen. Can you? Can you see my presentation all right?
Yep.
Good. Thank you. My name is Ed. I am one of the research data specialists in the Melbourne Data Analytics Platform team. Let me move this, maybe. There you go. And I'll take just 5 minutes to briefly talk about what MDAP is and what it does. If my presentation decides to work. There you go. So we are a team of academic specialists, and we work to enable data-intensive research across all the disciplines, all the faculties at the university. And MDAP was formed as part of a major initiative. It's called the Petascale Campus Initiative, which is a 5-year plan to accelerate the university's capacity for data-intensive research. And it started in 2018. PCI has 3 main components. Leadership, it is an academic-led initiative. So the plan is to bring the voice of academics into strategic choices related to research and research support within the university. Then there is infrastructure. Initially, around $100 million were invested in this initiative to boost the infrastructure that is supposed to support the research happening across all the faculties in Melbourne Uni. And then the workforce component, it's MDAP, and I'm going to concentrate on that. And again, we have 3 main pillars. The first one is collaboration. As I said, we're not a service provider, and contrary to other services and platforms available to researchers at Melbourne Uni, we're a team of academics. We're not a service provider, we're a team of academics, and we aim to collaborate as peers with researchers. And computing, our backgrounds are in a wide range of disciplines and faculties, and we are expert in digital methods. We do speak the language of researchers and also the computational science. And the name of the game, I think it's self-explanatory: research impact, boost research impact across the university. This is a snapshot of our team. The director is Professor Andrew Turpin. Dr. Andrew Siebel is our platform manager. And then we have a wonderful and diverse team of 19 data specialists, including me here, and Daniel and Rob will be talking about our collaboration with Nick, Brigid, Birgit, and Simon on TEI later on today. Here on the left, you can sort of see a cartoon how we see ourselves. So we all come from different academic domains, and we represent broadly the areas that are also represented at Melbourne Uni, roughly speaking, medicine, STEM, and of course, humanities and social sciences. And we all bring different computational skills and capabilities, and also other skill sets, which are mostly related to communication and being able to connect people across different domains and across the offering for research support at the university, that is a key part of what we do, connecting people. Again, let's see if it works. Oops, got stuck. There you go. I took this from our website, so you can take a look there. There's a lot of information, dap.unimel.edu.au. We hold technical expertise in from research to the design, data management, data stewardship, data collection methods, web development, all the way to natural language processing, artificial intelligence, visualization, and so on, much more. So have a look in our website for more information. And this is my second last slide. We mainly have two avenues of engagement with researchers. One is through collaborations. Those are big projects. We have a formal call for projects twice a year, typically. These are 3 to 6 months or even longer than that projects. And there is an external research allocation committee that will select applications based on the strategic value for the university, and it is a merit-based allocation. And we also have a less formal avenue for engagement with us. That is typically shorter projects, shorter in scope, smaller in scope if you want. This is always open, and we're always happy to talk to people and researchers across all faculties, and this includes also consultancy and advice. So if you have a problem, please send us an email at ndap-info@unimel.edu.au. We will try to help you, and if we cannot help you, we will try to find somebody who can at the university and connect you to the right people. And this is pretty much all I got. I'll leave there our contacts, so please feel free to reach out and get in touch. Our next call for a formal collaboration will be open soon, probably around September. So if you're interested, keep an eye on that. That's all I got. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Ed. And now I'd like to ask Birgit and Brigid, so Birgit Lang and Brigid Grigg, to talk about the project that they've been working on.
Muted, Birgit.
The sentence of the last 2 years, you were muted. I said I'm trying to share my screen, which I'm doing very slowly, but I'll get there. So my name is Birgit Lang. I'm an associate professor of German in the School of Languages and Linguistics. And I'm going to present today on a project that is a funny project, because it was one of those projects that went into the too hard to do basket until it was revived under Nick's initiative, and it will be reborn in a different form. And it's also a little bit a child of COVID, because we can't travel and can't distract ourselves in any different way. So what I have is a manuscript by, and Brigid has helped me with this as the key RA in the project, and she's also a PhD candidate in our school. So Otto Rank is, most of you won't know him. He is one of the early disciples of Freud. He was one of the first key collaborators of psychoanalysis, and probably the person most important to engage with the with the psychoanalytic analysis of literature and myth. He came to Freud. His entry ticket into the Freudian circle were three manuscripts that he wrote in response of Freud's 3 essays on sexuality. So it's a very symbolic entry point. And here are the 3 manuscripts. And the bottom one, über den Ausdruck homosexueller Neigungen in Mythos und Dichtung, that's the one we're talking about. It's translated roughly as concerning the expression of homosexual leanings in myth and literature. The manuscript is in the Rare Book and Manuscript Library in Columbia. I found it there. It's unpublished. It's about 90,000 words. It's a revised version, but not a completely finalized revised version of the first version that Rank wrote. So a challenging project on many ways, but it's also one of the key early texts in which psychoanalysts deal with homosexuality. And as a scholar of the history of sexuality and the history of psychoanalysis, obviously this is of interest to me. So the aim of the game of this project is to have this text online, both the German original, the photos of the archival material, and the translation. And so that what we embraced was this kind of quite complex task, really, for me, because I'm not into computers or TEI before I started this. So was to deal with 3 different sets of things. First of all, what do we need to do with the images? What do we need to do with the text? And what will we do with the translation? And so with the images, I think the first thing to say is they were made not for publication. So I went into the archive with a mobile phone, put it on maximum pixels, and photographed away, because I found this, it was a good find. I thought, I'll do this, and who knows what it will lead to. So they are we're all over the place. The other thing that was important to do was to rename those files, and I'll talk to you that has something to do with the transcription as well. And the other thing that we needed to resolve was the copyright, which we did. And with the text, we had to do transcriptions and then deal with the different textual versions that we have, including the order of the text, and we'll talk about that in a session. You can see here what we did with the images, or rather what Robert did with the images. So on the left, you had what I took in the archive, and on the right, you have what will be online eventually. So a much nicer version that is now angular rather than just completely tilted and a bit random. Brigid, do you want to talk to this slide maybe?
Yes. So because of the nature of the text being a rough draft, handwritten draft, the transcription that we ended up with contained a lot of information and was a bit messy in points. So we had to sort of make decisions about what we wanted to represent in the transcription and how we were going to represent that. So once we identified our priorities, making those decisions became a lot easier and a lot clearer. And the most important priority ended up being having a readable text, because we felt that would make the text more accessible to potential readers and wouldn't discourage people. And this was also enabled by the fact that our end product, as we've explained, will have a image as alongside the transcription. So if a reader does end up being interested in a particular passage or something, they can refer back to the manuscript and see for themselves what, for example, might have been crossed out or scribbled in the margins. So having readability as an overarching priority made editorial decisions much easier to make, because we could constantly orientate ourselves towards that goal each time a decision needed to be made. So keeping track of decisions that we were making became very important for consistency. So we came up with a rule sheet that we would continually add to, so that it could be referred back to if the same situation arose, which might not be for 5 chapters or so, and you might not remember how you responded last time. So in this way, we could keep consistent with how we were responding to different questions in the text. So we originally started working in using XML and Oxygen, but we went back to Word for the initial editing, since we're so much more familiar with it. and then are going to convert to XML at a later point. So the next steps will be to edit the text further using Oxygen in XML. And MDAP trained us in using Git to manage the changes in the image files, and TEI Publisher will be used later on to bring together the text and the images.
Thank you. And so to give you an example, we have some material already online, and that's what it's going to look like. And so that will be a little bit different, but it's much neater. So you can see, first of all, the image is rectified, looks lovely. And then on the left-hand side, there is the German transcription. There will also be, once the translation is done, on the right-hand side, the English translation. And we hope that they are kind of connected in a sense that if you hover above a sentence in the German translation, it will highlight the same sentence in the English translation. So that would be the end goal. We've also put in an overview, or rather Robert has done that very kindly for us, of all the images with thumbnails. And so you can go really in detail and look very clearly, very closely on what is written, and do that, be able to retrace the work that we have done in a way, the transcription. I think if I still have a couple of minutes, I'll talk a little bit about the trials and tribulations of publication, because this has been a steep learning process, this project for me, because I come as a Germanist, I come out of a very philological tradition. So for me to edit a manuscript according to readability was quite I had to rethink my thinking, but I came with a lot of baggage to do with this manuscript. I first found it in 2014. I did the transcription in 2015, and then I tried to unsuccessfully publish a bilingual print version of it with a critical edition. There was just no takers at that point, so this was revived then as a project through a digital internship through Skip. Where we put the first chapter online, and has now been progressed further with this TEI project between Skip and MDAP, which we've been part of. But what has become clear to me is also the economy of publication that we are all confined to. So if this thing would be published, if this as a book and through a normal publisher in paper or even online, it would count as a book, like would be 5 DISA points, right? But if we put it into the Melbourne repository where it sits at the moment, it will not attract any DISA points. And while this might sound very stingy of me, it is also the reality of our lives, of course, that we still have to kind of think about these things. And so it took me a while to sort out all the options we have, and it's not completely settled, but I thought it might be interesting for people who go into this to be aware of this quite clearly. So I think the way you could get publication points is through publishing, put the whole thing online, open access, and through a repository. Then you can publish articles, and that way you can get your publication points. You can publish the edition of the translation through an academic publisher, print or online, and make just the German bit, so the transcription and the images available online. Or you make the translation available online as well, plus have a translation, a publication of the translation. But of course, you need the agreement of the publisher. And so we'll see, I will try that probably, but we'll see how we go. Or the third option is to publish the whole project with an online publisher, which is also quite complex because at the moment that market is quite complicated in the sense that some of them do charge really a big amounts of money for publication. And like £10,000, like, so it's considerable, nothing that you can have, that we have covered through any kind of easy research money that we might be able to get. And then there are others that have a much more moderate fee, but obviously it's very highly competitive, and that kind of landscape has not been properly mapped. I think the person in the university who has helped me the most with that was Timothy Flanagan. I don't know if she made it today. Who is from the library. She's a liaison librarian for open scholarship and research output management, and I thought I'd put her here as well. And I think it's important to kind of keep those things in mind, and also to keep an open mind. Like I went through the team knows I went through various moods with all of this, and I think it's just part of the learning process. But I think for me, as the main gain of the project was to kind of learn a lot about both TEI publishing, but also about the digital side of scholarship, which in my field is not different to Nick's field, is not as important, simply said. Okay, and we wanted to thank many people, including Anissa, who was the digital intern, and that's it from us.
Great, thank you very much. And now Daniel Russo-Batterham and Robert Turnbull, the MDAP specialists we've been collaborating with, are going to present. Thanks.
Can you see my screen okay? Yep. So Rob and I are going to speak in a little bit more detail about some of the tools that have been mentioned already, and perhaps some new tools that people may not have heard of. So I'll start off talking first a little bit about TEI Publisher. This is just one of the examples that they've got on their website, but you can see we can have quite sophisticated presentations with both the image, the translation, various annotations, and different ways of presenting the text. I just need to move myself out of the way. So you can see on the right hand side here, there are, if you're working with TEI Publisher, there are sort of three main entities that you need to get to grips with. The first and most important, of course, is the actual TEI document. So we've seen a few simple examples of TEI so far. They can range from incredibly simple to incredibly complex with very deep markup. So you can see on the right hand side here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, we can actually navigate from TEI to view the underlying, from TEI Publisher to view the underlying XML. The second sort of core concept that TEI Publisher gives us is that of a template. And a template is just an HTML file that actually determines how things are going to be laid out. I'll just change my pointer. So you can see on this page we have three sections, and these three sections here are defined inside this HTML template. When you're first using TEI Publisher, this isn't something you have to worry about particularly, because there is a few sensible defaults that you're given. But as you want to customize how your material is presented, then you can dig more into the details. The third element that's important to this particular platform is this file called an ODD, which stands for One Document Does It All. And this basically translates the TEI into something that we can present on the page, because TEI itself can encode all sorts of variations. So this is just another example of a different template. So instead of the 3 panels here, we've got just 2. And again, this is just a difference in the underlying HTML. And on the right-hand side, you can see we have a drop-down that we're given with various defaults, if you like, that we can choose from. Generally, these work best when they're tailored to the material, but there are some templates that work well with different TEI documents. Might skip over this because I think Rob will cover some of this stuff. So probably the most important thing that TEI Publisher gives us, and other similar platforms and technologies, is a way to translate from the TEI to HTML or some sort of other presentation format. And I wanted to give a very simple example using a TEI transcription from some of my colleagues in France at the University of Tours. So here on the right hand side, we've got a snippet of an elegy, so a piece of poetry by Ronsard, who's probably the most famous 16th century French poet. But you'll notice straight away between the facsimile and the transcription, there are a couple of differences. So for example, here we've got an abbreviated form of the text, whereas with this particular styling here, we've got an expansion which has been encoded into the TEI. One of the strengths of TEI generally, especially working with some of these older materials, is it enables us to encode variants of one kind of another. And the key TEI element for these kinds of for this kind of process is this choice element. So we can see we can have a choice. I have to move myself out of the way again. A choice can contain abbreviations and expansions, original text and regularized text, as well as mistakes and corrections. And basically what this allows us to do is to keep in the TEI file all of the information that exists in the source, as well as additional metadata such as the modernized orthography of a word. And then when it comes to presenting this work, we can choose how we want to do that. If we want the old spelling or the new spelling, if we want to keep mistakes or get rid of them, if you want to flag mistakes with a footnote or have like a pop-up that comes up, if you want to have abbreviations or expanded text, where this comes up. So we can see here we've got, on the right-hand side, we've got an HTML representation of this file and a snippet of the underlying XML. And importantly, we've got these two choice elements. So up here, we've got an abbreviation, which is in the facsimile, and the expansion of the name. And similarly, underneath, we have the old orthography. People familiar with 15th, 16th century French will know that often use are written in this way. And then we've got the modernized spelling, if you like. And in this particular representation, we have the modern spelling and the expanded form of the name. So one of the great things that TEI Publisher gives us is a user interface for changing how some of these things are actually represented in the final form, because otherwise it can be quite a complex process. You need to understand some of the sort of deeper technicalities of the XML itself. So TEI Publisher lets us create for this ODD file, which again is something that translates from the TEI towards HTML or another representation. It lets us create these things called element specs. And element specs are just saying, for a particular element in the TEI, how do I want to represent it? So we talked about the choice. So here we've got an element spec for the choice. And then we've got a whole bunch of rules that define how it actually should appear on the page. And these rules happen to be called models, although that's not particularly important. What is important though is we can define these separately for different kinds of choice. So you can see we have a model for abbreviations and expansions, original spelling and normalized spelling, mistakes and corrections, and so on. So this is actually where the choice is made in this particular file to choose this expanded version of the name. So if we look up here again, we've got the expanded choice. And again, in the XML, we specify that which of these two choices we want to appear on the final page. And if we decide we want to change that, in TEI Publisher, it's as simple as changing one of these rules. So you can see here we change to the abbreviated form, which is in the original. And then if we compare the two side by side, after some of those changes, you can see we've got the original on the left-hand side, what we had before on the right-hand side. And there's a variety of ways to compare these, to actually present these two different forms. You could have, if you wanted, you could hover over, you could hover over this particular word here to see what the expanded version was, or you could hover over this to see what the abbreviated form in the original was, and so on. Or you could have footnotes or whatever other representation you wanted to have. So these ODD files that translate from the TEI towards HTML, these ODD files are actually TEI themselves. They're just a different kind of TEI. So this is just the XML representation of what we were looking at before. We say we want to create some rules for a choice, and then for that choice we have different models which relate to specific types of choices. So seek and core relates to mistakes and corrections. Then we have abbreviations and expansions, original and normalized, and so on. So the last few things I wanted to talk about is just some of the tools available in this ecosystem. So TEI Publisher itself has an XML editor built into it, which Nick showed briefly before. It's not the best tool I've used, but it does allow you to edit your files sort of on the website, or on the platform, which can be useful, and also gives you an easy way to view your TEI. A few people have mentioned Oxygen, so I won't go over all of this, but I'll just mention a couple of key features. So Oxygen lets you search for different parts of the text using things called XPaths. XPaths are kind of like file paths that we use to address different parts of the TEI. So in this case, I'm working with poetry. The poetry is grouped into stanzas with these line groups, and for each line we've got these L elements, and we can select, if we're interested in something only to do with the lines of poetry, then we can select those lines only with this XPath, and you can see we've got a summary of those down the bottom. Oxygen also gives you an outline, and on the right hand side it also gives you some tools for translating from this TEI to different formats. So you can see we've got, they call them transformation scenarios, but they're basically scripts that run and convert from the TEI to other formats. Oxygen is not free. It's not the most expensive program, and it works well if you're doing a lot of this work, but it isn't free. So there are some free tools that work quite well. For a lot of our coding work, we use a free text editor called VS Code, and that has some XML plugins that we can use for some of this kind of work. So there's one by Red Hat, and there's actually a TEI Publisher VS Code plugin, and I'll just show some I mentioned the XPaths before, which are very important for being able to point at different parts of a TEI document. So I'll show quickly some simple examples using the XML tools in VS Code. So here we're looking at the same document as we had before. We can search for all of the choices. So you can see we've got the different variants appearing there in pairs. So this is just searching for choice elements no matter where they appear. We can search for specific kinds of choices. Just as an example, if we're interested in orthography across a range of materials, we could easily extract old and new spellings and see, well, firstly how they've changed, how people represent them, and so on. We can do the same thing for the abbreviations and expansions, and of course we can construct these XPaths for any, to address any part of the document. And again, same sort of thing for finding mistakes. If, for example, we're interested in what kinds of mistakes different authors of these manuscripts made, then this would be a very quick and easy way to isolate those. Similarly, often in these documents we mark up people, so we can quickly pull up a list of people, and if we wanted, we could find only people that appear in the poetry itself. Same kind of thing. Same kind of thing here. So this XPath here, we search in the lines of the poem, and we find lines that contain a reference to a place. So if you've got a massive corpus, often you might be interested in the imagery of different places. For instance, this would be one way to isolate some of those elements. And lastly, this is a TEI Publisher plugin. So it gives you what it calls an entity explorer. So you notice in the original TEI, we have this sort of person one referent thing. What we can do if we want to is link off to authority records so that we could compare, we could look up the same person across many different TEI documents. So this is a particular authority database that's part of this TEI Entity Explorer. So we can search for the poet here, and we get the result here, and we can add that to the document if we want. So I've included in the slides a few links and things to resources. There's some in-depth video tutorials. I think it's about 4 hours of videos on TEI Publisher. There's some workshop materials on GitHub. There are Mozilla resources for learning about XPath, and there's a list of TEI projects. I'm just waiting for my page to... Oh, there we go. It's a list of TEI projects on the TEI Consortium web page, which can be interesting for finding good examples and getting some inspiration. The last thing that I'll mention is that TEI Publisher itself has what we call an API. So this is a web interface designed for manipulation with programming languages. And that means that we can take some of these elements of TEI Publisher and use them in different contexts and in creative ways. It also means that we can build automation around some of our workflows. We mentioned Git before. The way that we're working at the moment is that any TEI file that we put in our Git repository, using these APIs, we automatically push up to TEI Publisher so that we only have to maintain the files in one place. So I think that's about it for me. So I'll pass over to Rob, who's going to discuss some of the other technologies that we've been using as part of this project.
Rob, you're muted.
Hi, everyone. Let's try again. Can you hear me now? Okay, thanks, everyone. Well, hi, everyone. My name's Rob. I'm a research data specialist at MDAP. My research field is in medieval Arabic manuscripts. I'm going to speak briefly about two technologies that can be used with TEI documents. The first is Django TEI that we made as part of this project, and the second is IIIF. Django is a framework for building database-driven websites using Python. It's used by Instagram, PBS News, NASA, and a huge number of other sites around the web. It also forms a backend to several research websites that we've built at MDAP. And it has a content management system called Django CMS. So you can build websites interactively without having to write code. It's a bit like using Squarespace or WordPress. So we want to eventually present the work we're doing with TEI on the web and publish it there. We could use TEI Publisher, but it's got all the wrapping of TEI Publisher and the header and that kind of thing. You can take it out of, you can use TEI Publisher to export an app. That's quite complex and takes a lot of fiddling to get the styling working well. But this is an example of using a content management system with Django and also the Unimelb theme. But to make things easy to be able to publish a TEI document easily on a Django-based website, we made this little Django app where you just tell it the name of the TEI Publisher instance, and you give it the path to the file, and it'll display the TEI document in your website, and then you can build content around it using the content management system and to do all the styling as you would normally style a website like this. And as I showed you before, if it was under the Unimelb domain name, you could use the Unimelb template for that. So that's, and I'll give a few more examples of other things that this plugin can do as we talk a little bit more about images and the IIIF way of displaying images. So the second technology is the International Image Interoperability Framework, or IIIF. Images are a big part of making documents available to the digital world. In the past, when a researcher or institution wished to display images or documents or other artifacts online, they tend to develop their own custom system for displaying these media images. They might have some funding to hire a programmer, and they might develop something beautiful, but because it's custom written code, it isn't transferable to other projects. And in the next project, they have to start again from scratch. And then if the tech world moves on and the technology stack that you've used isn't regularly maintained and updated, then the website could go defunct and no longer work on modern browsers, and all your hard work is lost. So in this environment, we get many silos of bespoke digital humanities technology stacks that can't benefit from the work that goes on in the others. And with the same tech problems being solved again and again. To combat this issue, experts from Stanford University Libraries, the Bodleian Libraries at Oxford, and the British Library got together, and they designed an image presentation standard that could be used widely across the web. This turned into the Image Interoperability Framework Consortium, which oversees the development of the framework. IIIF is now used by hundreds of prominent institutions around the world to display documents, artifacts, newspapers, and many other things. Having a widely used standard means that compatible technologies can be reused across projects. And in some cases, you can combine the resources between these institutions in interesting ways. And I'll give you a demo of that in a minute. The IIIF standard consists of a handful of APIs, or application programming interfaces, which define the rules for working with the standard. The two most important for IIIF are for images and presentations. The image API gives a syntax for web requests that allows you to ask for different versions of an image that can be at different resolutions. For example, you can, just by editing the URL, so it gives an example of the way to structure a URL here at the bottom. You can ask for the full image at 800 pixels wide, or you can crop the image for a particular section. You can stretch it, you can resize and crop, you can rotate it, or you can mirror it, or you can put in grayscale. So once your images are in using this, you need software to be able to present to convert your images to use this standard format. For our project, we used a tech stack which combined a number of different technologies that are all run in Docker containers on the Melbourne Research Cloud. This combination is defined in a simple Docker compose script that we wrote as part of this project, and so you can easily recreate a IIIF server like this in a few minutes that brings all these technologies together. So once your images are accessible using IIIF, you can use any number of image viewers to be able to display your images online. One popular program is OpenSeaDragon, which allows you to, which enables deep zoom of images, a bit like Google Maps, how you can zoom from outer space all the way down into the local street level. So here's a massive map. You can it was originally designed for I think this is for taxation in Japan. You can see the person standing there for reference, and it's an image file that's gigabytes large. But if you're going to display it on the web, you want to be able to zoom out. And what they would originally do is walk on the map and look down, but we can't obviously do that. So you want to be able to zoom in. And so this, by it being in a IIIF format, you can see it, and in the low resolution, see the whole thing, and you can zoom all the way in to see the interesting detail. So we've integrated OpenSeaDragon into our Django TEI app. So you can simply tell the content management system about your IIIF server and the image file name, and it'll display your image using OpenSeaDragon's deep zoom. The second part of IIIF is the presentation API. That's a way of combining many images together. So that could be all the images of a manuscript or a book or something like that. In any item or artifact, like a manuscript, will have a manifest, which is a JSON file, which controls how all the images relate to each other. So a manifest can have any number of sequences, so they can be the pages in the book. And each sequence can have a canvas, and on the canvas, you can display your content. So a helpful way of thinking of it is a bit like putting together a PowerPoint document or a keynote presentation for each artifact. The manifest is like the PowerPoint file, and each slide in the PowerPoint presentation is a canvas on which you can present your content and arrange it in different ways. So you can have images, you can also have transcriptions, notes, and highlighted sections, and these can be displayed on and off. Now, there are a number of IIIF manifest builders on the web. For this project, we use a Python one, just a Python one that's doing it by code. And we created IIIF manifests for the auto rank manuscript that Birgit said before, and also Jeffrey Heath's grammar. And we made a Django, the Django app can present these IIIF manifests using a presentation viewer called Mirador. You just give the content management system URL for the manifest, and it displays the content on the web page. So this is for the grammar and also for the rank manuscript. One exciting thing about Mirador is that you can combine IIIF presentations from different places on the web into a single workplace. For my work on Arabic manuscripts, I can be looking at a manuscript from St. Catherine's at Sinai, and then I wish to compare it with another manuscript from the Vatican Library. So I just put in the URL for the manifest, and I can have them side by side in the Sinai website. And then for good measure, I can add a Judeo-Arabic manuscript from the BNF. That's the benefit of having interoperable technology based on international standards. So there's many other aspects of IIIF that I haven't touched on. For more information, I recommend going to an intro to IIIF video put out by the consortium. There's also a list of heaps of IIIF compatible technologies at Awesome IIIF, as well as some other intro workshops and blog posts and those sorts of things. The digital versions of these artifacts are going to be used in scholarship for hundreds of years, and the work that we do now to encode them using international standards will enable them to be developed and built upon by generations of academics. I hope that this presentation helps you in your work to preserve this cultural heritage and gain insights from it. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Robert and Daniel, for that deep dive into the many bits of technology that we need to use for all of this stuff. And now we're going to have an example from Simon Musgrove from Monash about a sort of an implementation of these various technologies that he's been working on. Thanks, Simon.
Thanks, Nick. Is my screen up now? Yep, great. Okay, so Nick mentioned when he was talking about his work on the Daisy Bates material that he'd been working at that for 8 years. I'm afraid to say that Nick and I have been working on this project that I'm going to talk about now for even longer than that. But I think we've got to a stage where we can say we're really achieving something, and I hope you'll appreciate that. So what we're talking about here is work on an Australian language. Nungabuyu, also known as Wuboy, and it's a language which is spoken in Arnhem Land. It's still being spoken today, unlike many of the Indigenous languages of Australia. And it's the subject of a multi-part description by the American linguist Jeff Heath, who worked in Arnhem Land in the 1970s and then published his work in the 80s. So there's a volume of myths and ethnographic texts, and as you can see from the screen, it's substantial. Then there's a dictionary, which is also fairly substantial, and the actual grammar itself, which is the collection of statements about the language that the linguist has produced from their analysis. And that's even more substantial. So the way that Heath worked was that he used references to his text volume to support points in the dictionary and the grammar. He didn't import material from the text. He just said, go and look at this text. So to use these materials, you're juggling these three substantial books, and it's not an easy thing to do. In fact, in the community of Australianist linguists, it's not uncommon to hear people talk about the dysfunctional grammar of Noongarbuyu as a result of this. So what Nick and I decided was that this was an opportunity to use modern technology, that this leaping between volumes, which is so difficult in physical artifacts, is very easy in digital artifacts. So we want to make this material available online with all this linking produced so that you can move around easily between the different parts of the description. And we also will integrate links to audio of the texts. So most of Heath's recordings we think still exist. They're held at IATSIS in Canberra. We're still trying to figure out how much we'll get. So why would we do this? As I said, because all of this is interlinked. The text instances support the claims that are made in the grammar. The dictionary entries reference text instances to support them, but also there are forms in the texts and in the grammar which you need to look up in the dictionary in order to understand them fully. So it's all interlinked, and in a physical world this is difficult. And of course then there's the audio corresponds to the texts as well. The extent of this interlinking is really massive. So we now have a list of all references from the grammar into the text volume, and that's more than 5,000 references. So we're looking at a really substantial interlinking, very dense interlinking between these components. And we want to make that all possible online so it's easy for the user. And of course, following the link is much easier than going to the different printed volume. Now, before I get on to talking about what we've actually done with TEI, I'll just show you what we've got of how this works at the moment, so you can get a sense of what we're playing with. So here's a page of a section from the grammatical description proper, the functional grammar. We have links to page scans here through the IIIF server. So again, anybody who wants to go back and check that we haven't introduced errors can go and look. Interestingly, the scans that we have are from a personal copy of the material that Jeff Heath has, and he's got some written annotations, inked annotations on there, which is also interesting. You can see that there's lots of links here. And I'll talk a bit about those different kinds of links in a minute, but just so you get an idea, we've got some words in Noongarbuyu, and we can click on them and we go straight to the dictionary entry for that word. We've also got references to a text. So it says there's an example of this form in this text and takes us there as well. And we can also then show you this is where we have some audio. This is the original recording that Heath made back in the 1970s.
Maria Banjana Golgolta. Maringa very much going, Maringa New Year thing, Maringa but Mabriding a Mara Mang or Moring a Yakwa. Majano Galamaki, Nayako.
Okay, so So that's the what we're aiming to do for all the material. At this stage, there's some there, and Nick maybe can put the link in chat where what we do have currently available can be accessed. It's limited, but we're working on it. So what's our approach to dealing with this? Well, there are two parts to the problem that we had to solve. One is idiosyncratic, and that's getting from the Heath materials in whatever form we could get them through to some kind of standard format. And then there's a step getting from the standard formats to HTML. And this, we think, should be reusable. That's what we hope that the work we do will encourage other people to try and present their work in the same way. And they will be able, if they can put their data into the kind of standard formats we advocate, then there should be a reasonably easy path to the web presentation. For the dictionary and for the text, which is interlinear text, there are formats that we wanted to work with. But for the grammar proper, the functional grammar, there wasn't an obvious choice. But it's a complex text, and TEI deals with complex texts. So that's what we've used, at least as a starting point. And we're still figuring out whether we need to extend TEI in particular ways, but it's given us a basis from which we can work, which means that we also, sorry, I'll skip out of here again, we also can already have a TEI publisher version. So this is what some of the material looks like in TEI publisher. We don't, unless we create all the dictionary and text material in TEI format, so it can go into TEI publisher, we don't see any way to get the links between the various components just using TEI publisher. But we can at least present the grammar in this format. And for people working in this way in the future, an advantage of that is that you can get an exportable printable version of your material this way. So we're using TEI, and then we can present in various ways. As Nick said, this is one of the values of the TEI encoding, that your presentation choices are quite wide. We're using a pipeline from that to HTML and also to the TEI publisher. Here's a little chunk of the kind of TEI that we're using. And there are two things that I'm going to point to here and then talk about a little bit more because they're specific problems. One, Daniel's already mentioned the possibility of using choice elements in TEI, and we have, as you can see, quite a few of those here. And I'll talk about them in a moment. And then we've got these ref elements. And they're very important because that's what we're generating links from. So what are we doing here? One of the challenges we're facing with this project is that there are two different ways of representing the language in writing. Geoffrey Heath created his own orthography, which is linguistically fairly principled, but not necessarily easy for people to use. The community use a different spelling system, which mainly came about as a result of people producing a translation of the Bible, but it's now used by people in the community if they want to write their language. We want to give the user a choice so that they can decide which of those orthographies they'd like to view material in. And I'll show you in a minute that we made it possible to switch. And as you can see on the previous slide, this is encoded using these choice elements because it is a choice, right? Because you can have one orthography, you can have the other. Now, Daniel showed you the kind of elements you can have within a choice, and none of those actually say one spelling or another spelling. So we've ended up using original and correction as the children of choice because they're not exactly what we want, but we've used them because then we can validate. So one of the important aspects of using TEI is that there are schemas that you can validate against and be sure that you have a completely well-formed TEI document. So rather than trying to change what's already there, we just have adapted those tags and used them for this purpose. The other thing I pointed to in the sample of TEI encoding is the references. And as I said, that's how we're generating the links between different components. And there's a wide range of possible references here. So there's, in the grammar, there are references to other sections of the grammar, such as chapters or subsections, and also phonological rules, which is a particular linguistic analytic tool. In fact, those resolve to subsections in a very easy way, but they're separately encoded. There are also references to figures and tables in the grammar, and there are also the references, as you saw, to text instances. References to forms in the dictionary are not directly in Heath's text. We're going to generate those just by searching against a lookup table. And there are also references to bibliography, which are minor. So all of those things we're using to generate links, so we need them to be consistent and detailed. So let's go back and look at how some of this plays out. So here I'm going to look at some of the more recent work we've done, where we're now generating, so the grammar page that I showed you before was hand-coded. Now we're looking at grammar pages that are being generated through our pipeline. We've still got access to page scans, we're generating some kind of navigation, and we're producing the actual text with references in it. The reason I've shown you this one with its very limited amount of text is because it's very easy to see the forms in Ngubuyu, and therefore it's very easy to see when I hit the switch orthography button what's happening. As you can see, we've got slightly different things happening. So we've got some superscripts that have come in, we've got some subscripts that have come in. And we can go back to the other version with the click of a button. The way that we're going to implement this is that on any given page, all the links go to pages in that orthography. So there's going to be two parallel sets of all the material, and on any page you can switch between the two, but then all the links take you within that universe. I think I might stop there, Nick.
Okay, well, thanks very much. Thank you very much, Simon, and thanks to all speakers. So we now have a bit of time for questions or discussion. So if you do have any questions, please, you can unmute yourself or put your hand up or put the question into chat. I think we've had, an outline of a number of different approaches to working with text and images. And you can see that there's varying degrees of complexity that you can get into. In fact, if you want to, you can get extremely complex. But at the same time, you can do a very simple rendition. And I think the rank material that Birgit's working with is a good example of fairly straightforward text and images, and a really nice way of presenting that. And with all of these, you may be saying, well, why go to all this effort? Well, once you start putting effort into creating what's called an apparatus, that is an interpretation of a text linked, which is based on manuscripts, you have to have some way of keeping that information. And the TEI gives you a way of keeping all that information in one place that will be robust and last into the future. You could put all this into a database, of course, but databases aren't going to last very well into the future. So the TEI gives us an interchange format as well as the basis for the presentations that we've been seeing. So please, any questions or any follow-up that any of the speakers want to make? Simon.
Following up on something that Daniel said, I just renewed my Oxygen license, and an academic license is like $25 a year. And if you're going to do any of this stuff, it's money very well spent.
Cool. Well, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. Some of the earlier ones were already answered in the chat.
Sorry, I have one question.
Yeah.
I'm interested in the linkings between the TEI and the original documents. How specific can that be? Like, do you link just to a page of the, say, PDF, or can you link to a more, can you do like word by word? Here's where you'll find it on the page.
Robert, do you want to answer that? I think you might have experience of linking down to the word level.
I did it again. Yeah, great question, Mark. So you can definitely annotate, especially when you're using IIIF, you can annotate anything that you like on the page. There's many examples of really quite complex annotations of many different features and different layers of annotations online. I can point you to some resources on that if you like.
Cool, that's fantastic.
So, I mean, I can also say that with the latest version, or one of the most recent versions of TI, it uses SVG, so you can point to coordinates on a page, and tools like Transcribus let you encode a document to the level of a word. So, you can exactly link directly into a word in a document if you need to.
Wow, that's fantastic.
To add to that, if any of you have worked with the correction tool in the Trove newspaper collection, that's based on a version of XML called OTTO, which allows you to link to a specific point on the page, which is why when you're correcting text, the cursor moves in the image as you move around.
Are there any potential users of the TEI out there? Are there people who have manuscripts that they're working with who could be interested in trying this technology out? Emily? Okay, well, that's good. So, I mean, we could look at setting up a user group or an interest group at Melbourne Uni if you want, or in Melbourne generally. Tony, did you want to say something?
Oh, yeah, look, firstly, just thank you to all of the presenters. That was both incredibly educational and downright inspirational. I've got one question and a request, if I may. The first question is just about sort of scaling this sort of thing up in terms of collaborative efforts. I mean, I was quite heartened to hear Simon just mention the Oxygen academic license is only $25 a year, but with people outside of the academic bubble, so to speak, that might go up substantially. In terms of sort of basic HTML tools to train people who might have some markup experience or something like that, to do large scale projects like transcriptions of manuscript collections, that sort of stuff. Has anyone got any experience on how you upscale that as opposed to having people with coding background doing the actual TEI? And my request is if any of the presentation, the PowerPoint presentations might be made available to people who took part, because they were incredibly detailed, a lot of work went into them, and I found them incredibly useful. So thank you again.
Okay, so we'll put the presentation and the video on the SCIP website, the Social Cultural Informatics Platform. But as for scaling, I don't know who wants to have a go at answering that. Well, so, okay, let me just maybe address some of it. That one of the great things with this is that you're just working with text files. So you have your images, and if you have them on an image server, that's ideal, but you can just have them locally on your computer. And the text file then is where all of your effort is going, and that's fairly easy to ship around. We have been working in a couple of these projects using Git repositories. So this is a free service where you can upload your files and it keeps versions of files. which is a very good way of doing collaborative work. So you can have a few different people working on the files, and you don't have this problem you have when you're shipping Word files around the place and you've got corrections in one and another, and you have to try and reconcile them. So I think it does scale very well. And then in terms of the number of manuscripts, I mean, you've seen with several of the projects that they're in the order of, thousands and thousands of pages that can be dealt with. But does anybody else want to answer any of that question? Okay. But yeah, I think, there's scope for us to keep doing this work. Are you at Melbourne, Tony? Sorry.
No, I'm at the ANU with a background in Chinese studies. So,
but yeah, we could look at having a TEI interest group in Australia.
Yeah, I might just add as well. It is important to find other people that are interested in this kind of work if you want to keep learning. I spent a few years working in France, which is where I learned a lot of this stuff. For me, it was as much as working with TEI, it was also working with MEI, which is the music version. But unfortunately, a lot of these XML tools, the books and training resources that are available aren't necessarily the most recent. So it really is important to find a community of people that have these skills and knowledge to share.
So yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, well, if not, thank you to all of the presenters. Thanks to everybody who attended today. And I look forward to perhaps running another one of these sessions later on, maybe next year. And we can look at some of the progress on the various projects that we've been looking at today. So thanks, and see you later.